Hello, hello, and welcome to Temple of the False Pod, where our decks are not optimized, but our plays sure as heck are fun. I'm Andy.
I'm Bruce.
And, what's the most important part of your deck?
Land.
Land. What do lands do?
Everything.
Everything. Surprisingly, not just make mana. Obviously, first and foremost, 98, I don't know, I'm pulling this number out of my ass, 95, 98% of lands do produce mana, but a lot of them do more than that.
Way more.
Or something completely else. So, today we figured we'd sit down, talk about some of our favorite. This is not in line with our Temple's Treasures. This is just completely our favorites. There's no
restriction on how many decks these are in. These don't have to be ancient cards. These are just freaking awesome utility lands. And
in fact, most of mine aren't ancient.
most of mine are, well, I guess not ancient, but certainly older.
So this is going to be our favorite utility lands. Yeah, these don't go in every deck, obviously, because some of these have color restriction.
Right. Some of them are going to have color restrictions. I think the only real restriction that we put on it was, one, it had to be a land, and two, it has to do something other than mana.
Right.
So
like, no Gaia's Cradle.
Yeah. Gaia's Cradle, Tolarian Academy, Temple of the False God, as awesome as these cards are.
Was I not supposed to put that on my list?
As awesome as these cards are, all they do is tap for mana. Sometimes tons of it, but that's all they do. So we were looking for cards that do something else. They can still tap for mana, and most of these do, but they have to do something else. Maybe they draw you a card, maybe they add a plus some counter, maybe they give your creature first strike. Whatever they do, they have to do something other than provide mana. That, I think, is pretty much the extent of the restriction.
Yeah.
Something else, I'm a land junkie. We will be coming back to land very regularly because I love this topic. I love it so much.
I know. When I mentioned the topic of utility lands, I don't think I've seen Bruce smile so much.
Oh yes, I love them. Love it.
I'll get things started. How about that?
Sure.
My first pick, I kind of went with the whole cycle, actually.
Okay.
Of the transform lands from the Ixalan block. You've got things like Legion's Landing, which flips and you kind of create some vampire creature tokens with lifelink. Why I love this cycle so much is because generally they're enchantments. I think there was also a cycle where they were equipments.
Yep.
And then when you reach a certain parameter, or what's the word? Requirement, I guess. You transform it, and it turns into a land. So my favorite out of this cycle is Storm the Vault / Vault of Catlacan. Wow, I couldn't have chosen an easier one to say. Catlacan. So Storm the Vault is 2 blue and red. Legendary enchantment. Whenever one or more creatures you control deals combat damage to a player, create a treasure token. At the beginning of your end step, if you control 5 or more artifacts, so not just treasures, transform it. And it transforms to the other side to Vault of Catlacan, which taps for 1 mana of any color. I just realized that this only makes mana on the land side, because it also taps to add blue for each artifact you control. Yeah. But I love this cycle so much because it creates not necessarily chaos, but like a smaller goal, it gives you a game inside of a game.
Yeah, I was just going to say it creates a mini game because then you everybody else is left to look at this and say, okay, the number of ways we have to destroy a land are pretty minimal. The number of ways we have to destroy an enchantment are certainly more plentiful. Maybe not, maybe still not quite bountiful, but certainly better than destroying a land. So how close do we let him get?
Yeah. If I was to choose one that did more than just create mana, Hadana's Climb is really good. It's 1 green and blue. I feel like I've not seen this be played nearly as often as it should. At the beginning of combat on your turn, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. Then if that creature has 3 or more +1/+1 counters on it, transform Hadana's Climb. So like really easy to hit in green-blue decks. And when it flips to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool, or for 1 green-blue and tap, target creature you control gains flying and +X/+X until end of turn, where X is its power. So it essentially doubles its power.
Yep.
And flying, which is always excellent. So,
yeah.
Those are like my 2 favorites from that cycle.
And I think that this is a card that should be sitting in a number of my decks that I've been ignoring, because the transform is easy.
Yeah, absolutely. 3 or more on 1 creature is.
We're talking about Cynic colors here.
Yeah, easily. This cycle is some of the best things that we've got out of Ixalan. Obviously, some of the legendary creatures were overpowered and fantastic, but this cycle I feel kind of didn't necessarily fly under the radar, but I feel like there have been many a time where I've pulled one of these out and people have been like, oh, what is that? So check those ones out.
Absolutely.
Bruce, what do you got?
I'm going to go old school, way old school. This is hardly a surprise find for anyone. I think anyone who's been playing Commander for any length of time has definitely heard of this card. Maze of Ith. Now, Maze of Ith is also the reason I keep saying some of these lands produce mana. Virtually every single land produces mana of some kind. Almost all of them. The Maze of Ith is one of the ones that doesn't. Unless, of course, you've got Urborg Tomb of Yawgmoth floating around, then it does. But it's one of the only lands that doesn't produce mana. So you're putting this in your deck solely for the effect. Obviously, this should not count towards your land count when you're working out the right number of lands for your deck. Anyways, for the 2 people out there who are listening to our podcast who don't know what Maze of Ith is, it is a land, and it says, tap it to untap target attacking creature. Prevent all combat damage that would be dealt to and dealt by that creature this turn. Which means you play Maze of Ith, and when somebody attacks you, you pick their biggest creature, or you pick a creature that gets some kind of benefit if it does combat damage to you, or whatever. Choose their biggest threat, tap the Maze of Ith, they untap their creature, but it doesn't deal any combat damage. It's just so perfect.
Yeah.
The reason why I rate Maze of Ith so highly is because when it's out there and it's not tapped, people don't attack you. And it doesn't matter if it's a guy with 20 tokens or somebody who has a Voltron deck. None of them attack you. Because even the guy with 10 tokens who wants to swing at you and knows they're going to make all of their little 1/1s into 5/5s hates the idea that their 5/5 is going to get untapped and not do any combat damage. So they go after somebody else. Everybody wants to maximize their number. Maze of Ith can sit there against multiple opponents, deterring attack after attack after attack. It is so good. So good that way. The only time your opponents have to gang up, they have to recognize the first person to your left. When it's their turn, they have to recognize their biggest creature is going to get untapped and not do damage. But it means your maze is tapped, and then they have to rely on the next 2 opponents to actually swing in while the maze is tapped. This sounds straightforward, but it virtually never happens. Never. Maze of Ith just continues to do its job just by sitting there on the table, not doing anything. And then the joy is, on top of that, you now get to mess with other people's combat. And wow, that's the first time in this podcast when I've ever wanted to use the F word. Real bad! Because that's exactly what this card does. It completely helps with other people's combat. Because I can untap any attacking creature. It's just a target attacking creature. It doesn't say creature attacking me. If somebody has something that, when it does combat damage, they get massive life totals, or they get something else, whatever, you can stuff it. And everybody else at the table is just like, thank God he stopped them, because I had no way to do it. Then you can turn around and say, okay, well, so let's keep that in mind when your combat step comes around, because I've just stopped this from hurting you. And it is so effective, and it's so clean, and they've made all sorts of versions of this card, but every other version costs extra mana. There's always the extra cost, whereas the maze can just, literally, you put it on the table, you put it next to your lands, and you put it just a little to the side. You make sure everybody can see it, it's very clear, and you put it to the side so you don't mess up and count it when you're trying to figure out how much mana you have and how much mana you need to do whatever it is you're going to do this turn.
Maze of Ith it's like a $10 card. Something cheaper is, even from recent as Theros Beyond Death, Labyrinth of Scophos, which, like you said, costs extra mana. It taps for colorless or 4 and tap, remove target attacking or blocking creature from combat, which essentially does the same thing. But what I find interesting is that the Labyrinth doesn't untap the creature, which I feel like could be like a way to, like, in certain circumstances, be a little better than
right. And I think that's how.
But you're also paying 4 extra mana.
That's how you justify the 4.
Yeah.
Like Mystifying Maze is another one. I wouldn't call it old school, but it's certainly a little older. It taps for mana, so that's better. You can spend 4 and tap it, and you exile the target attacking creature an opponent controls. So it just goes away. And then at the beginning of the next end step, return it to the battlefield tapped under its owner's control.
Ooh.
And so 1, under its owner's control. So if somebody has stolen it, you have a way to get it back if it's yours, or you can return it to somebody else. So there are benefits there that Maze of Ith doesn't offer, but it costs 4. So it's not cheap. But, so Mystifying Maze does something very similar, but at the same time, it does have a little bit of difference. And I do like what it offers. But the reason I've chosen Maze of Ith, it's free. If it means that the person gets their creature back untapped, well, okay, that's a price I'm willing to pay. Better than just taking it to the dome. Yeah. Andy, what do you got?
Oh, so many. My next card, pretty well known. It's called Alchemist's Refuge. Taps for 1 colorless mana. Or, blue and green and tap, you may cast non-land cards this turn as though they had flash. So for 3 extra mana, essentially, you get to play your sorceries, your creatures, your enchantments, your artifacts, as though they had flash. It's a much cheaper but harder to manage version of Vedalken Orrery. But
yeah, the Vedalken Orrery, it demands a bigger initial outlay.
Right.
And obviously, on turns when you don't need it, you don't get to tap the Orrery for a mana. So yeah, with Alchemist Refuge, it means whatever card, because it's usually just 1 card you're looking to cast.
Right.
It means that card gets flash because you're paying 3 extra.
Right, which is fantastic. Especially in blue and green, where you're generally going to have 3 extra.
Right. Something else? I'm going to say this just this time, and then I'm not going to say it again. Andy said it costs 3 mana. But if you look at the card, it says green, blue, tap. So it looks like it costs 2. And when you start looking at these cards, when you see that they cost something and then it says tap, you have to remember that that tap symbol is tapping a land. It means that you can't use that land for mana. So realistically, it's costing you an extra mana to do whatever it is that the Refuge or any of these other lands offer. So
Yeah.
just keep that in mind. So when Andy says that it costs 3 to do this, it does. It does. It isn't as though, we misread the card. It costs 3. It says
Right.
2, but it's 3.
Yeah. The land doesn't care where the other 2 come from, but you're still tapping this one.
Right.
So you're essentially putting a mana into it to get the benefit. Thank you for bringing that up. This, though, like, adding 3 to a green or blue or colorless spell to give it flash is, I feel like, really, really strong. Obviously, those colors are very strong, but, if you have something that your opponents won't like and want to get rid of it immediately, just wait until it's almost your turn, and then this helps you flash it out, and bam, it's your turn, and you get to use it.
I especially like Alchemist Refuge. I like it with Seedborn Muse.
Ooh.
Because you can play the cards on your turn. At the start of the next person's turn, everything untaps, which means you now have a clean slate. So if you have 6 or 7 mana, you spend 3 of it on the Refuge, you now have 3 or 4 mana left to cast that creature or that sorcery at instant speed or whatever else. And then on the next person's turn, you can threaten to do it all over again. And that's a beautiful thing, just because it can get difficult to try and get in as many of the cards as you want, just because it can create a restriction. I mean, obviously, once you're into the late game, when you've got 12 mana or 30 mana, 3 seems like nothing. But
yeah,
it can be a little tough. There's a number of times when I have played it and overvalued it to the point where I will look at my hand and say, I want to play this stuff at flash, go, but I've given up an opportunity to play 2 cards on my turn so I can play 1 at flash speed later on. So you do have to be careful with that, but there is no denying the benefits of Alchemist Refuge. There just isn't. It's a great card. Something I got to do, I was playing a deck with Alchemist Refuge in it, and we had gone around the board. It was my last opponent before my turn, and I had nothing I really wanted to play at flash speed. I had no instance or anything in my hand. It was going to be a dead turn, and then I thought, okay, well, you know what? I do have this card that I could play. It doesn't matter when I play it, but I'll maximize the use of my mana. But what I did was I tapped the Alchemist Refuge for its ability at the start of his turn. I said, hang on. Tap the Refuge. I can play non-land cards as though they're flash for the rest of your turn. And then they looked at me and he said, okay, so what are you playing? Nothing.
I'm not telling you.
Nothing. And then I just sit back. And now he's wondering. I mean, he's not thinking about a counterspell. He's thinking about a creature that's going to jump out and block. So now he's looking at his combat step thinking, if I swing at Bruce, he's probably just going to block and kill whatever it is I play. I was looking this as, well, you know what? I got a 2/2 creature. Better to use the mana up now. So I was waiting for the end of his turn to play that out. But in the meantime, he's looking at this going, what pit of ugliness is going to come out and stuff my combat? It was very effective. And I got to do it several turns in a row just because of the way it worked out. You know, when you don't have anything, even if I only had 2 mana left over, he knows it's probably going to be a creature, but you know, it could be an enchantment. Could be, like you said, it could be sorcery speed removal.
Could be a signet.
Why not? I mean,
yeah, right.
You know,
if you got it, might as well.
I was playing blue-green. It wasn't a signet, but in any event, it was another way to use the Refuge.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Before we go any further, before we talk more about more lands, we have a sponsor for this episode.
Oh boy.
So let's go listen to that, and we'll be right back.
Okay. Sunday, Sunday, Sunday. Come down to Nomad Stadium and check out the chariot races. For only 20 zibs, 20 zibs get you a seat in the lower level. You'll be so close, the driver's sweat will be splashing off your face. That's it, 20 zibs for a lower level seat. We'll sell you the whole seat, but you'll only need the edge.
And now back to you.
Hey, welcome back.
Hey! Long time no see, friend.
Man, oh man, I can't wait for those chariot races. Okay, so my next card is, well, I guess it's cheating, because it's every card.
Excuse me?
Well, it's every land. Vesuva.
Oh.
Vesuva reads, you may have Vesuva enter the battlefield tapped as a copy of any land on the battlefield. So, if you're in dire need of a particular kind of mana, Vesuva can cover that. If someone else has a Maze of Ith that you really like, you can copy that. If someone else has a Strip Mine and they're looking to get rid of your land, you can copy the Strip Mine and return the favor to them. Or make multiple copies of whatever card you like. Obviously, I don't recommend making a second copy of Gaia's Cradle or Tolarian Academy or other legendary lands, but there are plenty of other cards. I like the flexibility of Vesuva just because I like that it can fix your mana, or it can copy another utility land, and I think those are both benefits. Now, I will say that when I run Vesuva, it's because I am running a number of utility lands, whether they're, the Maze of Ith that I just talked about, whether it's Alchemist's Refuge, if you're concerned that one of them is going to disappear. So Vesuva, it's one of my quiet favorites.
It's pretty sweet. It's very flexible, obviously, but it also just does a good job of doing exactly what you need it to do. I mean, I guess unless it's in your opening hand, but just hold on to it, I guess.
Well,
worst comes to worst, you just make it a basic land.
We have talked about this in the past with Temple of the False God. When you look at your opening hand, we don't include Temple as a land. That's a dead spot in your hand. So if you don't have the land to be able to run, then you don't include it. With Vesuva, if your goal with your deck is to make it a copy of something beyond what you already have in your hand, then don't include it. I mean, I am generally comfortable enough that I'll include it in my opening hand if I've got another dual land, or, a land that allows me to tap for extra mana. Because even then, I will take the Vesuva and go with that. And a lot of times when I run Vesuva, I try to run the Ravnica bounce lands, just because then I'm comfortable playing Vesuva as a copy of a dual land when I've got all these other utility lands that I really want it to be the copy of, so then I can just bounce it. You play your Ravnica dual, bounce the Vesuva back to your hand, and now suddenly you're playing it out 5 turns later as a copy of Maze of Ith. Now you've got 2 mazes, and, well, that's extra amazing. So Andy, what's your next card?
My next card is, again, just a small group. It's not necessarily a cycle because they come from different sets.
That's all right. They can still be a cycle.
Yeah. So we've got, they're all colorless, which is excellent. We've got Arch of Araska, Bonder's Enclave, and then the one I kind of want to talk about more, War Room. Essentially, they come in, you can tap it for colorless, or pay some and tap it to draw a card. So Arch of Araska, tap it for colorless, or 5 and tap, draw a card. Activate this only if you have the City's Blessing. This card, strictly speaking, is kind of garbage. It's great if you have a City's Blessing deck, and you just need the City's Blessing, and are worried about getting wiped before that happening. But overall, paying 6 mana, because it's 5, and then tap this one as well to draw, is not great, but it's very easy to, in a lot of decks that run instance, if you're holding up for those instants, and the opportunity doesn't strike, you have somewhere to put that mana. It's a good mana sink. Same with Bonder's Enclave. Bonder's Enclave is a little cheaper. It's 3 in tap to draw a card, but you have to activate this ability if you have a creature with power 4 or greater. So just like a different requirement.
Yeah.
And then out of Commander Legends came War Room, which taps for colorless or 3 in tap. Pay life equal to the number of colors in your commander's color identity. Draw a card. So obviously you want probably a mono colored deck or 2 colored deck. I would probably not put this in a 5 color deck because 4 mana and 5 life is a lot to pay for a single card.
Yeah.
So for 4 mana and like a couple life, you get to draw a card at instant speed. It's pretty good. And since all of those are colorless, they can go in any deck. So if you're worried about card draw, this can be situational for you.
You mentioned War Room specifically, and I do like the card. To me, the idea, though, is that War Room really, its extra ability plays well with the fact that it taps for generic mana. Generally speaking, you want your land to tap for a color, because generally that's better for casting your cards. However, War Room is easier to use in a deck that has fewer color requirements. So if you run it in, you run it in a mono white deck. In a mono white deck, this reads, pay 4 mana, pay 1 life, draw a card. That's not bad. And it can easily go into a monocolored deck because you've already got 30 plus planes in there.
Yeah, you're not really worried about making that mana requirement for any given card.
So replacing A planes with War Room, it isn't going to suddenly hurt you. Whereas if you're running a four color or even a 3 color commander, pulling one of those lands out, even if it's just a basic of one of the colors, is reducing your chances of drawing that color, and you're paying 3 life to draw a card. Well, if you're running a 3 color commander, odds are it's going to be blue. It'll have blue, black, or green in it. In which case, why are you running a land that forces you to tap 4 and pay 3 life to draw 1 card? There are better options. But in a monocolor deck, I really think this works well. I don't think that the demands on your deck and the demands of the card itself to draw you the card are really all that outrageous.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I like this card.
Fun little one. What do you got?
I'm going to stick with that with the card draw. My next card is another older one. This is from Saviors of Kamigawa. It is Mikokoro, Center of the Sea. This is another legendary land, so don't put 2 of them in your deck. It taps for colorless, and the extra ability is to spend 2, tap it, so for 3 mana. Each player draws a card. Now, so this is Temple Bell, essentially.
Yeah.
But it's on a land that taps for mana. So if you need the mana, you can just use it. But if you want to draw the card, you can. No one's going to ever take out this land. No one is strip mining this thing away.
Yeah.
No one. Everybody draws a card. Now, you get to pay less than War Room because War Room draws you the card, not everybody. This one gives it to everybody. So obviously, there are fewer decks you're going to want to put this in because there are plenty of decks where you really don't want to let your opponents be drawing cards. I love this. I've always felt like if you put something in your deck that everybody benefits from, there is goodwill that goes along with this. And
it's not just those decks where it's like, oh, when opponent draws a card, they take 1 damage or whatever.
Right.
And having the political nuance of giving somebody else a card is powerful.
Now, yeah, sure. There are plenty of decks where, oh look, all of you draw a card, so each of you take a point of damage. Sure, those are there, and that's certainly an option. But I like to treat Mikokoro more along the lines of the Temple Bell, the Howling Mine. Everybody draws a card. The benefit here is that you decide when that happens. So usually at the end of your opponent's turn, if you've got the mana to do it, you can do it then. You tap, everybody draws the card. You're the first one to get to use that card. That's sort of the key for me. Howling Mine, the big drawback has always been that you draw the card, but it's too late. You're the last one that gets to use your brand new card. So it's always been a little frustrating. Mikokoro gets around that, and that's part of the reason why I rate it so highly. Cards like this, I find I like to use them politically. You know, you look at a card like Edric, where it specifically says on it, attack me, you don't draw a card. Attack somebody else, you do. Okay.
Right.
This does the same thing, except you have to voice it. It's like, do you really want to draw a card? Because, you know, I'm happy to have everybody draw a card, but nobody's going to be doing combat damage to me. Or nobody draws the card. I mean, that's just how it's going to go. And as long as you make that clear, you know, that attacking me will cost you a card draw, that will deter a lot of people just as effectively as Maze of Ith. You just have to make it known. So it does require a little bit of careful diplomacy. I mean, I love that. So Andy, what is your last card on this bunch?
My last one.
The last one.
There's a lot to choose from. My last card I'm going to talk about is Throne of the High City. It's from Conspiracy Take the Crown, so Conspiracy 2. Taps for colorless, or for 4 and tap and sacrifice Throne of the High City. This is the only one that I chose from the like newer lands, because there's so many newer utility lands that you have to sacrifice it to get anything done, and that is kind of a pain because like it's your land, you don't want to kill it, especially if it taps for mana. But this is the only one I did because it does something very exciting, which is when you tap it with 4 mana and sacrifice it, you become the monarch. And with that, you introduce, or you could very well potentially be introducing the monarch to the game.
So Andy, this card, I think you misread it. It says tap, add 1 colorless to your mana pool. It also says 4 tap, sacrifice it, add way more fun to every single Commander game. Period. That's
right?
all that's all it says. The Monarch makes every Commander game better. It adds a sub-layer, and it does everything. And the idea that this land can do that at your whim is just awesome.
Yeah, those who don't know, becoming the Monarch means that you get, at the beginning of your end step, draw a card. Whenever a creature deals combat damage to you, its controller becomes the Monarch. So it encourages people to attack, which moves the game along. Otherwise, they're giving you extreme card advantage because you get to just draw a card for nothing.
Yeah, you are doubling your card draw if you are the Monarch and keep it. Now, you're not gonna.
No.
You're not gonna keep it. Now, admittedly, what this card says is, I can become the Monarch, but I choose not to yet. So if you're running a deck with, let's say, Queen Marchesa, and you are no longer the Monarch, well, this is an easy way to get it back. And then poof, just like that, now you are the Monarch. So it either brings it into the game, or it takes it from somebody else. And you can use it either way. So however that works for you. But this goes in, it can go in virtually any deck. I mean, the only decks that I think shouldn't run this are decks that have no hope of ever getting the Monarch back and no chance of ever actually keeping it.
Right.
And maybe 5-color decks where having a land that taps for that taps for colorless, and then at some point just disappears is just too big of a downside. Yeah. However, again, we're talking about 5-color decks there. Virtually every other deck are running either 3 or 2 or 1, And I think that Throne of the High City can go into almost any of those decks. So.
Yeah. Bring more monarchy, please.
Yes. I'm seeing a theme with a number of our cards where lands let you draw cards.
Since that was my last card, what is your last card?
My last card. Way back when, there was a writer named Anthony Alongi, and he is still out there. You should be following Anthony on Twitter. I made it sound like he's dead. He is definitely not dead.
Yeah, way back when and now.
Anthony's one of the few people who play Magic who is actually older than I am. Sorry, Anthony. Hope you're listening, and hope you enjoyed the dig. Anthony created the multiplayer card Hall of Fame, where he took ratings of like a series of ratings, weighted them, and then basically took all the Magic cards and ran them through this formula to produce a Hall of Fame. Basically, the top cards in these. In each section, the top blue, the top white, top colored cards, the top whatever. When Anthony stopped writing, this just sort of got set by the wayside. Because, as I later found out, it's a lot of work. At some point, when I started writing for Wizards, I took up the mantle and brought it back. And and it was a blast. I really enjoyed doing it. We rehashed everything. I did it again. The card that I'm about to talk about gets the number 1 ranking of lands in multiplayer Magic. Keep in mind, this was as of 2014, so you can argue that it's out of date. However, I still think this is a powerhouse card. I love this card, and I try and put it into almost every single deck that has red and green in it. Because I've
seen
running
you win with this card so many times.
It is an easy way to snag wins. The card is Kessig Wolfrun. It's a land. It taps for colorless. The other ability is for X, red and green. You tap the land. Target creature gets +X/+0 and gains trample until the end of the turn. Now, you can do this anytime. So you can wait and see if the creature gets blocked and then just apply it to a creature that's been blocked. So that way you can do trample. You can use it on your commander to ramp up the commander damage. Remember, this is going in decks that have red and green, so they tend to have a lot of mana. So X can often be big enough to just kill somebody outright. This card, when I use it, often I will let it sit for several turns and just tap it for mana. And then everybody forgets it's sitting on the battlefield. I'm not hiding it. It's just sitting there. But when a land can give a creature trample, it is so easy to forget. You see that 9/9, you know you've got a chump blocker for it, you're going to be fine. And then suddenly, I tap Kessig Wolfrun where X is 0. So I need Kessig Wolfrun, a mountain, and a forest. I only need 3. Tap that, the creature doesn't get any power bonus, but it gets trample. And when you're playing with green creatures, you got a 9/9, a 12/12, whatever. They're swinging in, and suddenly that 1/1 they threw in front of it to chump absorbs 1 point of the damage instead of all 12, and you're spilling over and doing a ton of damage to an opponent with one of the creatures. I've put this in token decks. I've put this in Voltron decks. I put this in decks where there's only 10 creatures. I put this in decks where there's 40 creatures. It just goes everywhere. And after all I've said about it already, the card doesn't specify that it has to be your creature. So if an opponent has a commander that's swinging in and you didn't have anything to do on your turn, so you're sitting there with 12 mana. When they swing in, you can now you can make X 9. So I can take an opponent's commander who's swinging at somebody else, add 9 points to it, or just give it trample. what if somebody's swinging in with a 3/3 death touch? I mean, maybe they're throwing a 1/1 in front of it to just chump block and know that it's going to die. Well, now I'm giving it trample and making it bigger. Or they're swinging in with a massive creature with the idea being, they were going to get some kind of benefit by just attacking. They're like, they worked out a deal and said, well, can I attack you with this? You can just chump, and then I get whatever because I attacked. And then I jump in and say, surprise, I didn't like your deal. Here's the new deal. Boom! That card now, that big massive guy now has trample. Oh, and I'm even going to pump up the power to make you really, really think twice about doing that deal the next time. You can do this, and it's just so flexible, and it works so well. And admittedly, putting it at the top of a list where every other land could, in theory, be put in any deck, and this deck can only be put in decks with red and green. Doesn't seem really fair, but it is just that good in those decks.
Yeah, I mean, we really didn't have any restrictions going into this, and this truly is like a powerhouse. Keswick Wolfrun is I've seen it win a lot of games.
It wins a lot of games. It does. And, I said earlier that people forget about it. Well, you know what? It works just as well when they don't. Because if everybody is thinking to themselves, Keswick Wolfrun, suddenly, when you swing in with that 3/3 creature, they don't want to chump. Because it's like, no, I gotta be able to kill this thing. Because I'm going to put a creature in front of it, and it doesn't matter how big that creature is, it's going to die. Because they know that I'm just going to pump it.
Using it helps teach you proper ways to play Magic. Like, you're going to keep all of your mana up until your second main phase, because
yes,
if you need to use it, you can.
Right, yeah. Why play a creature? Why are you playing spells on your first main phase? You're just reducing the amount of mana that you have when people are wondering whether or not you're going to play combat tricks. Well, Keswick Wolfrun encourages that kind of play, even if you don't plan to use it. You've already got all of your mana dedicated to something else, and you know what that thing's going to be. Well, wait until your combat's over. Right now, they're all thinking Keswick Wolfrun is going to be, or could be added to anything. So you swing with your 3/3. They're not going to block with something huge. They're probably not even going to block with something small because it absorbs a point. It's not absorbing all 3 of the damage. So they're just going to let it through. They take the 3. And then you don't do anything with Keswick Wolfrun. And then on your second main phase, you tap out and do something else. And then they're left going, geez, I wish I had blocked. And it's like, yes, that's the best part. Because you want them guessing all the time. You want them always wondering.
Yeah, so. It forces your opponents to play unusual for themselves.
Right.
They're double guessing themselves and you. So, but yeah, what a great card.
Just wonderful. I really like the card. It's always a good time. So,
lands. Who knew that they were so nuanced?
They're awesome.
There's so many more utility lands that we want to talk about, but I mean, we have an hour, so that's what we've got for today. I'm sure we'll be back to talk about more utility lands as they come out and as time goes on and we run out of things to talk about. But hey, these are some of our favorites. Reach out to us on Twitter or via email. We're falsepodmtg on Twitter or falsepodmtg@gmail.com. Tell us some of your favorite lands. We want to hear from you. That's going to do it for us tonight. We're Temple of a False Pod, where our decks are not optimized, but our plays sure as heck are fun. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Andy.
I'm Bruce.
And may your 5th land be the Temple.
Bye!
Hey everyone, Andy here. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Temple of the False Pod. Just a few housekeeping things here at the end of the show. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, pretty much wherever you can find podcasts. Subscribe and give us a review. It really helps out the show. And it'll show us what you like about our podcast. Also, we've got a Twitter and an Instagram. Our handle is falsepodmtg, all one word. So be sure to follow us. Feel free to reach out to us there or drop us an email at falsepodmtg@gmail.com and tell us your favorite Magic-related story. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you again to you and to Bruce. He's Mana Burned on Twitter, and I'm Andy Weekend on Twitter and Twitch. We're Temple of the Falsepod, where our decks aren't optimized, but our plays sure as heck are fun. Have a great night, and may your fifth land be the Temple.